So we come to the real meal as well, which is the Dhamma. So we're going to see what we are going to do here. Did you do some chanting this morning, Venerable? Did you do some chanting this morning? What did you chant? Metta Sutta? Yeah, okay. English, partly? Both. Okay, that's good. So it's like, okay. Okay, yeah, everyone. So, welcome again. We are going to start the suttas, and we're going to start off very sort of gently by looking at some of the background of why the suttas are important, why the word of the Buddha is kind of special in a way. And to me, this is a very important point because so much of the Buddhist world is kind of caught up still, even though it's changing a little bit, caught up in what you might call traditional teaching methods. Yeah, you can, in general, you can distinguish between like teaching teacher to student or teaching directly from the word of the Buddha. And one of them is often known as the Acharya-vāda. Acharya is like the teacher. Vada is the doctrine. Yeah, so it's kind of a common way of things being passed on in the world. They follow the doctrine of the teacher and carry this on from generation to generation. But the alternative is, of course, always to go back to the word of the Buddha, the Buddha Vachana. And this, to me, has been neglected in Buddhist history. And even in the present day, I think it is not fully appreciated the importance of going back to the Buddha himself. And there is okay, important business. Okay. So that's very kind of you. Okay. The two for me? Really? Okay. Wow. Okay, two. Either one or three, you know. Just Buddha's very big three. So the idea, the reason why the word of the Buddha matters so much is because it sets the standard for everything else. And this, you know, how do you know whether a particular teacher teaches in the right way? How do you know whether someone is enlightened in this world? How do you know whether someone knows what they're talking about? It's very, very hard to know for sure. Sometimes you may have a feeling someone seems to have all the right qualities and don't seem to have any defilements and all these kind of things. But of course, that is a hint, it's a pointer in the right direction when you see these things. But it's not something you can actually ever know for certain. And for this reason, it's very important to come back to the word of the Buddha. And important to recognize that all of Buddhist history looks back to the early teachings of Buddhism. If you look at Mahayana Buddhism, you look at the Abhidhamma Pitaka, you look at the various schools of Buddhism that have existed throughout the world, throughout the millennia and centuries, Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, whatever it is, it all goes back to one source. And that source is the word of the Buddha. And everything else in the world history of Buddhism only has meaning to the extent that actually the early suttas exist. Everything else builds on that. Everything else points back to that. Everything else can only be understood if there are the early suttas. Without the early suttas, everything just falls apart. It doesn't have any meaning anymore. It doesn't really, it doesn't actually work. And so for this reason, the word of the Buddha is very significant and it matters. And I guess many of you, you wouldn't be here if you didn't believe this already. So maybe I don't have to say it, but maybe some of you are a little bit more new to these things. And so it becomes a gold standard for what Buddhism is about. And it's very interesting. And one of the kind of interesting things that come out of modern scholarship of the suttas is that the suttas we have now, in all likelihood, the main content of the suttas and the main ideas that they express, in all likelihood, actually do go back to the time of the Buddha. Actually, are probably spoken by this one person, the historical person who existed 2,500 years ago in the Ganges plain, and this person we now know as the Buddha. So it kind of the historical study kind of converged from one time in one place. It's kind of a set of teachings that are coherent, and they coherent in many different ways. They're coherent in terms of doctrine, but coherent also in terms of language that is used. The coherent in terms of the the geography and the history that actually you find in the suttas, and it kind of all holds together very nicely. And if you compare them to other Buddhist texts, they are very, very different from all of these kind of perspectives. So that is why it all matters. And basically, the reality is that if the Buddha was not enlightened, if the Buddha didn't have some kind of special insight into reality, then everything else collapses as well. And we don't have anything. And so we have to assume that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. Because if the Buddha didn't know what he was talking about, well, then we have a real problem in Buddhism. This is kind of the foundation stone of everything else. So this is why I want to talk a little bit about this before we get started. But before I do anything else, I'm going to have some more coffee before it goes cold. Louder. Okay. Sure. Okay. I can try. I'll try. But you want to come a bit closer? Yeah, that'd be a good idea. Because some people have really good hearing; they can hear everything. Some people, That's much better. Yeah. Nice to see you again. Very good. I can start the coffee. Can you can come closer if you like. Oh, this is going to be a couple of things here. So many things behind my ears. It's feeling up to feel like that. Yeah, okay. I see. Okay, I think that should be all right. We'll get this one out. After 9 days, we'll have it perfect. Okay. So, okay, good. So that's nice to have you all closer. I kind of have a reasonably natural volume. If I try too hard to be loud, I think it's going to be a bit more difficult. Anyway, so let's look at this in a bit more details. This first sutta of this retreat is from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the greatest sutta on the Buddha's passing away, the Buddha's extinguishment, as we have the translation here. And this particular translation is by Bhante Sujata, who I know. I know some of you know him already. Probably most of you may have heard of him. He's very, very. There's a lot of translations of the suttas, and it's kind of becoming very well known for that now. And I think not anyone has translated as many suttas as he has. So it's kind of extraordinary, at least not in the English language. And this sutta, greatest sutta on the Buddha's passing away, is a very interesting sutta from a number of perspectives. Precisely because this is the Buddha's last journey that is described here. This is a journey where he starts out in Rajagaha, ancient capital of the Magadha. Magadha later on becoming, of course, the great empire. Yeah, all of India being pretty much part of this Magadha empire, except for the very, very southern tip of India. Everything else was part of this large and broad India empire. And so this is the last journey of the Buddha, where he walks from Magadha to Kushinara, where eventually he passes away. And it's all the happenings that actually happen on that trip. And it is not really a sutta in the ordinary sense, because usually a sutta is like a specific teaching, engagement of the Buddha, where he kind of the Sangha is together, and everyone is there, and he gives a specific teaching. This is more like a historical record. And so it has little snippets of things that the Buddha said set in a historical context, if you like, of this last journey. And because of that, it is a little bit different from what we normally think of as a sutta. One of the important things about the sutta is that it was obviously collected after the Buddha passed away. Otherwise, it kind of wouldn't have been able to tell the whole story, and then it even carries on after the Buddha passed away a little bit about the distribution of the relics and these kind of things. And for that reason, it is quite possible that some of the historical data you find there may not be, perhaps not quite as authentic as some of the teachings of the Buddha, which was always the focus of the monastic community. The monastic community would listen to the word of the Buddha, they would focus on that, and they would learn these teachings. It was always kind of the main purpose of the monastic community. And only later on, they start to worry about places and names and all the kind of details of ordinary life. So this is an important point just to bear in mind as we go through this. And you do find, when you kind of compare the various versions of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, you do find that there are some discrepancies occasionally, and then we have to kind of decide what is real and what is not real. This is what kind of makes for scholarship in Buddhism. People find discrepancies, they can write a paper or a PhD thesis on these things, and it sustains the scholars of Buddhism. And sometimes the work that comes out of that is actually very interesting. Some of these scholars do very important work, and you actually gain a better insight into these teachings as a consequence. So what is fascinating then about this particular sutta is that the Buddha knows that he's going to pass away. He says in this particular sutta, he says, 3 months from now, it will be the it will be the end. It will all be over. I will attain my parinibbana 3 months from now. So he knows that he's coming to the very end of his life. And of course, when you know that you're coming to the very end of your life, you want to kind of remind people of what is important, right? These things are the things that really matter. This is how you summarize these teachings. And not only do you want to summarize your teachings and kind of pass on what really matters, you want to say something to the Sangha and the lay people about what to do. How are you going to survive? How are you going to survive without me? Something like that. Because obviously people are quite attached to the Buddha. The Buddha is such a towering figure. You can imagine having the Buddha around, and then the Buddha passing away, what that kind of would feel like. It would be pretty scary. I mean, even in the present day, people grieve and they lament when a teacher passes away. But imagine the Buddha passing away. It would be like really traumatic for the Buddhist community. And I think a lot of Buddhist history after the Buddha passed away needs to be understood in light of that trauma that it actually was for the Buddhist community. Because when you understand the trauma, you also understand some of the development of the kind of Buddha legend, the Buddha mythology that happened after the time of the Buddha. It kind of fits in this idea of the difficult time of the Buddha passing away. But the main point for today is this idea that in the sutta, we can expect some very significant pronouncements by the Buddha about what are the essential teachings of Buddhism, about how the Sangha is supposed to think, how the lay people are supposed to think, how everyone is supposed to kind of act. And so this is kind of what makes it especially fascinating. So I've taken out a very small snippet from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, just to read out to you and to discuss a little bit. if you want to hear the full exposition of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and there is a recorded things online. A number of monks and nuns and other people have done this, but I did a series of discussions of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta that are available online. I think you went over 20 sessions, I think. So like 20, and each session maybe a couple of hours or 1.5 hours, something like that. So it's a lot of very interesting information in there, which makes it fascinating. This is only going to be a short snippet, and otherwise, if not, we're going to have to stay for a very long time on this retreat. So that's a good idea, actually. It's like a month, okay, maybe a month is more like it. So, okay, so I'll start by reading out what we have here. This is what we have. Is after the Buddha had commenced the rainy season residence, he fell severely ill and struck by dreadful pains close to death. But he endured unperturbed with mindfulness and situational awareness. And it occurred to the Buddha, it would not be appropriate for me to become fully extinguished before informing my attendants and taking leave of the mendicant Sangha. Why don't I forcefully suppress this illness, stabilize the life force, and live on? So that's what he did. And then the Buddha's illness subsided or died down. So here we see the Buddha towards the end of his life. And it sounds like the end of the life of anyone. You get very ill towards the end. Things are kind of falling apart, and you have some very severe pains, as is very common towards the end of life. So this is kind of an important point about the humanity of the Buddha. Sometimes I think we look at the Buddha in the wrong way. Like I like to say, we put the Buddha on the wrong pedestal. We put him on the God pedestal, the eternal Dhammic principle pedestal, instead of the human being perfected pedestal. And in some ways, the human being perfected pedestal is a far more interesting way of thinking about the Buddha than the kind of as a deity or some kind of supreme Dhammic principle or anything like that. Because we can start to have some relationship to a human being, even if this human being happens to be perfected, still there is some relationship between us and that human being. So it actually matters how we think about the Buddha. And thinking about the Buddha as a human makes us closer to the Buddha. The Buddha started off in many ways like we did. In the suttas, the Buddha specifically says that he had defilements before he became enlightened. Specifically says he had wrong views, specifically said he was attached to worldly things like, a wife, children, these kind of things. Wealth, whatever that might have been. So in a sense, once you see that, you realize we can relate to the Buddha. Not only can we relate to the Buddha, some of the most fascinating discourses in the entire Pali Canon is precisely where the Buddha talks about his own experiences. He talks about how he overcame these problems, how he was able to deal with these issues and make progress on the path. We're going to have a look at least one of these suttas later on. And because of that, these suttas really only make sense to us if the Buddha was a human being just like us. What's the point of listening to some kind of God or cosmic principle presenting their idea what the path is all about? It doesn't really relate to us if they are of a different age, different category of being. It's only if the Buddha is human that actually relates to us. So all of these things here point to the humanity of the Buddha. He had dreadful pains, right? And sometimes people think that the Buddha doesn't really suffer pain. The Buddha can't suffer at all, right? This is kind of a very common idea in Buddhism. But actually the sutras are fairly clear that the Buddha did have pains. Because if you have a physical body, how is it possible to have a physical body without pain? Does anyone here have a physical body without pain? Congratulations if that's the case. it's impossible, right? I mean, this is one of the first things you realize when you start sitting, especially when you become a meditator, is that the body is always causing you problems, always being very unreliable. Yeah, this is a kind of bleeding obvious, as they say. So, and the Buddha was the same. Of course, the Buddha's pains were different. They were different in the sense that he doesn't identify with them. He doesn't say, think of them as my pains. And once you think of them as my pains, well, it makes them far worse. A lot of the suffering in life is precisely because we take these things to be me and mine and myself, etc. Yeah, this is kind of the big issues in life. Nevertheless, the Buddha had physical pains. He could still experience the body. So the Buddha was human. He was getting old. He was falling apart. He was experiencing more and more pain. Yeah. And this is why I think this next little phrase, he endured this unperturbed with mindfulness and situational awareness. This is kind of the idea, the sutta is telling us the ideal way of dealing with that kind of pain. It is saying that the Buddha himself, he had these pains, but he knew how to deal with it in the right way. Again, it emphasizes the humanity of the Buddha again. So you're mindful and situationally aware. Sati sampajanya. This is Bhante Sujata's translation of sampajanya, situational awareness. So I think it's a good translation. You are mindful in the appropriate way. You think about things in the appropriate way, depending on the situation you are in. That's kind of the idea here, situational awareness. So here you would have known the appropriate thing to do when you're sick. Yeah, take some medicine. Yeah, get a massage by Ananda. Maybe I don't know if you give him massages. That's what we do in the present day. Yeah, Ajahn Brahmali, when he comes back from Dhammaloka Center, he's tired and exhausted, and 3 or 4 monks go up to student and massage him. Yeah, and he falls asleep while he's getting massaged. That's the secrets of Vimala monastery. Yeah, for you. So maybe they gave the Buddha massage as well. Yeah, I remember I once went to visit Ajahn Ganha's monastery. Ever heard of Ajahn Ganha? Yeah, Vimala is this really cool monk. He's really, really nice. He was Ajahn Chah's nephew, or he still is, I suppose, or I don't know. Are you still a nephew when the person has died? I guess you are. I'm not sure how these things are supposed to work. There's so many things. Okay. And he is this kind of really bright, extraordinary person. Yeah. And he's just kind of really amazing. I went to visit him, and he's always really bright, always full of energy. Yeah. And maybe towards the end of the day, his energy kind of dies down a little bit. And so he retires and he meditates for half an hour. Yeah, and he comes out full of energy again. Yeah. That's all he needs, to kind of be full of beings all the time. It's kind of extraordinary when you see that. There's something about seeing people who are special that really is very useful for the path. Yeah, it gives you the sense that something is possible that you had no idea was possible. How can somebody be so bright all the time? This goes against the laws of nature, right? It's not supposed to be possible to do this. How can this happen? So when you see that, you get a feeling for the potential of the Buddhist path. One thing is to read the suttas. It's great to read the suttas, but it's a bit dry, right? It doesn't really give you a sense of what actually the lived experience is as such. And so being able to see people that actually have practiced this path really a long way, have some of this experience, and that experience is reflected in their conduct, is actually very, very powerful. So this is one of the reasons I chose Ajahn Brahmali as my teacher, because to me, he was one of the people who really expressed the Dhamma through the way he lives. And so at the time I was living in England, I thought, oh, no, I got to go to Australia. Yeah, okay, so I called Ajahn Brahmali up and said, Ajahn, can I come to Australia? He said, okay, come. So I came to Australia. That's how I started got down there. So these things are really important. But then you go up in the evening, or I think it was in the evening, or I can't remember exactly when it was now. And Ajahn Ganha's getting a massage. Yeah, and you have, how many monks was there? 10 monks or something like that, massaging. He had this big chair he was sitting in. It was really relaxed, smiling, always radiant. Yeah. And 10 monks all the way around, and everyone kind of massaging one tiny part of the body. Yeah, you get like 1 toe each if you're lucky, and you massage this body. And it's very, I don't know, it's very sweet. Yeah, it's actually very beautiful. It's this idea that here is someone really worthy of your support, really worthy of this massage, really kind of, and so everyone wants to have part of the action, as I say. And I wouldn't be surprised if this goes back, this idea goes back to the time of the Buddha himself. There isn't really much reference to massages in the suttas. Do you remember any massage happening in the suttas at all? Not really. It's missing, isn't it? There's saunas there, that's true. Yeah. But there is reference to massage actually in the Vinaya. I should know that because I've been yeah. There is, yeah. But so actually it goes back a very, very long time. It goes back to the time of Buddha. Everything we do goes back to the time of Buddha, you know? It's kind of weird. It's one of those strange things. You see all those little details in Buddhist societies around the world, and very often they are based on things that you find in the suttas. It's kind of extraordinary. I think massage is the same thing. Yeah. So I'm getting a bit sidetracked, I suppose, but it's a good fun anyway. Yeah. This is why these talks take a long time sometimes. But so yeah, so then the Buddha thinks it is not appropriate for me to become fully extinguished, yeah, before informing my attendants and taking leave of the Sangha, saying goodbye to the Sangha. Yeah, so you want to say goodbye, first of all. And this year, the idea of becoming fully extinguished, and this is a translation of parinibbana or parinibbayati, which is the verbal form there. And this is one of those things that I was discussing with Bhante Sujato, is how do we do these translations? And one of the really important things that we decided on was to translate everything here. There are a few words that are not translated, like Sangha, I think isn't translated. And that's some of that are really, really hard to translate. But Nibbana is not that hard to translate. It has a very clear meaning. It had a meaning at that time in ancient India. And if you don't translate these terms, what it means is that people read anything they want into it. Nibbana, yeah, okay, what does it mean? Now, it means like the greatest spiritual kind of outcome of spiritual practice. Yeah, and then of course you can read it as whatever you want. But in ancient India, it had a particular meaning. So what is that meaning translated into modern terminology? Well, extinguishment is actually a very good translation. And so you translate it so as to avoid confusion and misunderstandings about what Nibbana actually is. This is, I think, a very useful and very nice translation principle. Of course, it assumes that the translator knows what they're talking about. Yeah? If the translator is dodgy, yeah, you have a problem, right? So is it Bhante Sujato, is he a dodgy translator? This is the first thing we need to find out. And so what is the answer? Well, he's pretty good, actually. I reckon he's pretty good. That's my feeling, yeah. And it's probably hard to find translators that are much better than that, to be honest. Bhikkhu Bodhi is a really good translator as well. He's really eminent and with really good language skills. It comes out really beautiful when he translates it. But so generally speaking, but it's always good to remember that translators are human beings. Yeah, sometimes they may make mistakes, and that's kind of good to keep in mind. Get the copy a bit closer. Okay. Right, so he had mindfulness and clear awareness because that is required when you have a painful body. And then he has to say goodbye to all his attendants, yeah, and take leave. And so another important point, yeah, the Buddha, of course, because of his position in the Sangha, he realized that he has to do this. And I guess to give people a chance to ask any final questions and these kind of things, we'll see all of that actually is found at the end of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. So why don't I forcefully suppress this illness, stabilize the life force, and live on? The idea of forcefully suppressing the illness is, I think, maybe I find this translation slightly, maybe a little bit misleading here, because the idea in the Pali here is that you suppress the illness not by so much by force, but by virya. And virya in Pali is actually energy. And energy is quite different from force. Yeah. And the reason for that is in the suttas, you have this distinction between effort on the one hand and virya on the other hand. And effort is padana or vayama in the suttas. And this is the sixth factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. Yes, samma padana, samma vayama. But virya is the energy that arises as a consequence of practice. So if you practice well and your mind feels energized, yeah, you feel this kind of really, you feel like a nuclear reactor. That's what Ajahn Brahmali once said, yeah, come out of samadhi, you feel like a nuclear reactor. And if you do that, that is a very different feeling. It's a natural energy. It is an energy that is peaceful. It is an energy where you don't have to apply yourself. You don't have to force anything. Yeah, it is just this beautiful sense of power within that you have when the mind becomes incredibly peaceful and incredibly happy and blissful and these kind of things. So it is quite different. Yeah. So when it says forcefully here, it misses this point that this actually is a natural energy of the mind, the outcome of spiritual practice, essentially. And you find this in some very interesting suttas you find in the Samyutta Nikaya. The Samyutta Nikaya, of course, being the connected discourses of the Buddha, and these are thematically collected suttas, collected according to theme. And some of those suttas are found. This is found in the Bojjhanga Samyutta. Bojjhanga are the factors of awakening. And please tell me off if I use too many Pali words and you can't understand what I'm talking about. Please let me know, and I can try to rectify that. But hopefully you're okay. And so in the Bojjhanga Samyutta, it's all about the 7 factors of awakening. And there are some very interesting suttas in there about monks. Yeah, these were Arahant monks who were very ill, and they were about so ill they were almost on the death's door, about to pass away. And so they say to some other monks, oh, please recite the 7 factors of awakening. Yeah, many of you will probably know these things if you're into the suttas. And then they recite them, and then they kind of, in that moment, they kind of, rise up, and the illness is finished. And it's kind of extraordinary. But the most extraordinary thing is that the Buddha himself is really ill, very similar to this kind of incident right here. And then the Buddha asks one of the other monks, this monk called Mahachunda, supposedly a nephew of Venerable Sariputta. He was also an arahant, apparently. And he asks him, please recite the 7 factors of awakening. So he recites the 7 factors of awakening, and bang, the Buddha is fine. Yeah, it's kind of strange, isn't it? Why didn't Buddha just recite them for himself? Why did he ask Mahachunda to do this? And it's hard to be absolutely sure what is going on there. It could be that maybe the Buddha was a bit low on energy, which is exactly what happens. Yeah, that's what it seems to be happening here. Maybe he wanted someone else to recite it full of energy and kind of, bring out that power of the Bojjhanga so the Buddha could kind of feel them through someone else. Or maybe he wanted just to show how to make it clear how to actually overcome illnesses in this way. Yeah, whatever it might be, it shows you something about the power of the mind. And here the connection is the Bojjhangas. And of course, the Bojjhangas are the factors of awakening, and they are all about samadhi practice. Yeah, they're all about how to achieve deep states of meditation. Virya is one of these things. So virya is always the thing that you use if you want to overcome samadhi. The power of the mind, when the mind is very blissful and very powerful. And so this is what we see here as well, the similar kind of thing. And it's this understanding in Buddhism, which is that essentially the mind has a very powerful impact on the body. Yeah, mind and body are very closely involved with each other. You cannot really separate them fully. So these are very kind of closely enmeshed with each other. And I think this is one of maybe the weaknesses of modern medicine, that we don't really accept fully, understand fully this enmeshment between the mind and the body. And if we did, actually, maybe our medicine would be different. Yeah, maybe we would say, sit down, do some meditation, do some metta practice, overcome that ill will. That ill will, that might be the source of your illness, perhaps. And I think sometimes it is. Sometimes they say that suppressed anger can have very bad effects on the body, yeah. And there is now a lot of studies, medical studies in the world, which show that actually the mind does have a lot of effect on the body. The placebo effect is a very important effect, yeah, which is very well known about. How does that work? Well, obviously, it is some kind of effect between the body and the mind, yeah. But we don't take these things seriously enough. If we had taken these things really seriously, we would have investigated the placebo effect. And maybe we can forget about medicines and just use the placebo effect, right? Just use the power of the mind to overcome these things. So this is really what is going on here. You use that power of the mind to overcome the physical things. And it's not just wishful thinking. It is actually known, even to medical science, that this actually is the case and this works. So this is what the Buddha does. He overcomes this. He uses the idea of the life force, yeah, the jivita sankhara. Sankhara is like to create something, yeah, sankhara. So it's like you're creating life, essentially. That's what the Buddha is saying here. So he creates life. Why don't I create life and live on? It's almost like having the will to live, yeah, understanding the importance of living here. And so it carries on in this way. So this is how we can do things, how we can kind of live better, have less, eat well, of course, but what you feed your mind, even more important than what you feed your body, perhaps. I'm not suggesting you should neglect your body, but I'm just saying that, there is more to it than just the physical, just the eating right. And of course, later on in the sutta, you may remember later on in the sutta, the Buddha says to Venerable Ananda, why didn't you, Ananda gets a bit concerned, the Buddha is about to die, and he says, oh, please, can you live on? And then the Buddha says something to the effect that, oh, if you had asked me, I could live on for an eon. Yeah, that's what it says there. And is that possible? To live on for the eon? It's kind of fascinating. Is it possible? I mean, even if you use this kind of technique of using your effort and using your energy, can you actually live on for the eon? I must admit, I find it very hard to believe these kind of things. I'm one of these very skeptical Buddhists, but I sometimes skepticism is in place, right? Actually, it makes sense to be a little bit skeptical about certain things because the Buddha's body is already falling apart. He's been alive for 80 years. Now, how many 80 years are there in an eon? It's quite a large number. Have you calculated that ever before? So if you do a calculation, so how long is an eon? Say the eon is, how long could it be? Something like 30 billion years, something like that. So 30 billion divided by 80. Or it's like maybe half a billion, yeah, a little bit less than half a billion. So you have half a billion lifetimes. So if your body deteriorates this much every 80 years, you multiply that by 500 million, the body is going to be pretty bad shape, right? After all of that. So it makes you wonder whether this really is a very sensible way of thinking about things. So sometimes, and it's kind of strange because even the commentary seems to be a bit embarrassed about this, because the commentaries are, well, actually, it doesn't really mean eon, it just means a lifetime. But actually, there is the commentary doesn't really have much basis for saying that. So anyway, I'm just saying that because sometimes we need to read these texts with, things that seem really outlandish. Okay, put it to one side at the very least. Don't have to believe in it 100%. Anyway. So that is what the Buddha did, and then the disease abated as a consequence. Venerable Vimala was just saying to me yesterday that there was too many pages in these documents. I'm sort of starting to see what you are saying now, but we are. But I have this ability to go fast and slow depending on the situation. I think we should be all right. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so let's carry on. Soon after the Buddha had recovered from that sickness, he came out from his dwelling and sat down in the shade of the dwelling on the seat spread out, the prepared seat. Then Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, it's fantastic that the Buddha is comfortable and well. Because when the Buddha was sick, my body felt like it was drugged. I was disoriented, and the teachings weren't clear to me. Still, at least I was consoled by the thought that the Buddha would not become fully extinguished without making some statement regarding the Sangha of mendicants." Mendicants are the monastics here, the monastic Sangha. So we have the Buddha coming out of his dwelling, sitting down in the shade of the dwelling, and sitting down on the prepared seat with the seat spread out. There's kind of this little things here which I find very fascinating and interesting. This kind of idea that he sat down in the shade. And of course that is what you do in ancient India, because the weather was so extreme, it was so hot. Even in the present day, if you travel to India, I don't know if you have been to India before. If you have, it's only a tiny part of the year when it's relatively cool, and the rest is utterly unbearable. You go to Bodh Gaya at the wrong time of the year, it's like 45 degrees, and the sun is kind of blazing, and it's really hard, really unbearable to be there. And so you would sit down in the shade, because it was so rough, basically. And these are the little things that make the sutta real. It fits with a kind of, what the reality was at that time. And the suttas are full of these little things, full of little details of ordinary life in India at that time. How people behaved, what they did, things that are really strange. People, I think in a certain place talk about people spitting, And of course, people spitting is not something you normally have in a religious text, unless you are describing ordinary life, what people are actually doing, sitting down in the shade of the building. And there's lots of these little things in the sutras. And this is one of the things that distinguishes the early Buddhist texts from later texts, because later texts were often written somewhere else. They don't have these kind of little details about what life was about at that particular time. Anyway, so then Venerable Ananda, he goes up to the Buddha and he says, it is wonderful that the Buddha is comfortable and well, because he was obviously concerned about the Buddha. He thought the Buddha might have passed away, and obviously he was very bothered by that, because he says, because when the Buddha was sick, my body felt like it was drugged. I was disoriented and the teachings weren't clear to me. You can see here the powerful trauma it is for the whole community, maybe for everyone, whether lay people or monastics, whether female or male, whether nuns or monks or whatever it was, it would have been very, very hard. And here is Ananda. Venerable Ananda was supposed to be a stream mentor at the time. He's supposed to have an insight into the nature of reality. You wouldn't think that you would be so traumatized if you are a stream mentor. But of course, because the Buddha was so close to him, it still had a very powerful impact. So here you get this feeling of the kind of the significance of this occasion of the Buddha's passing away is very, very significant. It has a lot of impact on the monastic community. People are feeling drugged. They're feeling like you can't remember the teachings anymore because your mind is kind of out of. That's kind of problematic, but that's exactly when you need to remember the teachings is then, and you can't remember them. And this is why, and we all know that when your mind is full of hindrances or something goes wrong in your life, that's exactly when you can't remember the teachings, just when you need to. You can remember them, but they're kind of a bit of a blur somewhere in your mind. You're not really sure. This is kind of often the problem with these things. That's why you need to be thoroughly brainwashed. If you're thoroughly brainwashed, then there's a good chance you might remember them at the time when it is required. So this is how it goes. I like the idea of brainwashing. It's just so true, right? It's kind of exactly what it is about. But it's a good brainwashing. That's kind of the point. Anyway, it's actually Venerable Vimala. If people want to ask questions about this, are they going to write down questions or how does it work?
There's a box at the end and you can write down questions and we also have a spreadsheet.
Okay, so it's all very well organized. Okay, good. Because, great. It's good to have a chance to ask questions about these things because Yeah. So this is the kind of the situation for the community. People are feeling really distraught. And then Venerable Ananda says, well, at least I was consoled by the thought that the Buddha won't become fully extinguished, that making some statement regarding the Sangha of mendicants. So Ananda is kind of expecting something from the Buddha. So what does the Buddha reply here? But what could the mendicant Sangha expect from me, Ananda? I have taught the Dhamma without making any distinction between secret and public teachings. The realized one doesn't have the closed fist of a teacher when it comes to the teachings. If there's anyone who thinks, I will take charge of the Sangha of monastics, or the Sangha of monastics is meant for me, or it should look to me, or whatever, let them make a statement regarding the Sangha. But the realized one doesn't think like this. So why should he make a statement regarding the Sangha? This is one of these great little teachings that you find in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. I don't think anywhere else, because this is where the Buddha is summarizing his life's work, and this kind of fits in with that summary, right? The idea that, first of all, that there is no secret teachings. Everything is out in the open. Yeah, everything is public. He doesn't have any kind of favorite disciples. Yeah, I'm going to teach Venerable Ananda, but no one else. And then you pass it on secretly to the next generation, and you have a secret lineage, which is kind of slightly on the side of everyone else. There is no such thing here. Everything is open. Everything is available to everyone. This does not mean that we should teach exactly the same things to everyone. If someone is a beginner starting out, okay, you start gently. You say, okay, watch your breath, yeah, relax, enjoy the meditation, and have a good time, and see what happens. You don't start off telling them about the cessation of everything, because they might walk out and never see them again. So you have to be wise about how you kind of make the progression of these teachings. But in principle, all of these things are available. They haven't been taught. No one is actually favored. The only thing is that you teach slightly differently out of compassion. But there's no favoritism in Buddhism. And this is such an important point. Yeah, and it is a point that is lost on so much of in Buddhism, and certainly outside of Buddhism, where these kind of things actually happen. Yeah. And so they're ideal. They're supposed to be open. That's why it's so good to have the suttas available online for everyone to read. Everyone can access these things. This is why it is very important to have the monastic Vinaya available online, so people can understand how monastics are supposed to behave and what they're not supposed to do. These are very important things. And in many traditions of Buddha, the Vinaya is supposed to be secret. Yeah, no one is supposed to know. And I think that is a bad idea, because it means that there is no way that anyone can actually check on the monastic community whether they're doing the right thing or not. And that is important to have those checks and balances between the lay community, between the monastic community, and between the, all the four parisas, the four assemblies that kind of keep an eye on each other, and who is really kind of worthy of respect. Even if you don't know they're enlightened, that means you have some way of deciding who is worthy of respect and who is not. So everything is open. Yeah, very important point about these teachings. You don't have a teacher's fist, yeah, where you hold something back. And then the Buddha says, and this, of course, is very important also for the history of Buddhism, is that if anyone thinks, I will take charge of the Sangha of mendicants, or the Sangha of mendicants should look to me, let them make a statement regarding the Sangha. Yeah, and then the Buddha says it, but the realized one does not think like this. The realized one, the Buddha himself, doesn't think that I am in charge of the Sangha. This is kind of interesting, isn't it? The Buddha has just been the leader of the Sangha, the leader of the monastic community. He has laid down all the rules, he has given all the teachings. Whenever there is a tiny problem in the Sangha, everyone goes to the Buddha and says, Venerable Sir, please help. Can I eat sugar with a tiny bit of, flour in it after midday? Is that allowable or not? Imagine the Buddha having to go through all of these kind of things. Yeah, what is the exact limit? How much flour can be in the sugar before it becomes unallowable? Is it 1% or 1.5%? What is the exact limit? And this is the thing. This is why, you know, it is a lot of dukkha to be the Buddha. Yeah, you have to answer all of these kind of things. You have to deal with all the issues in the world. There's always, wherever there's people, there's always issues, always things going on there. So, but the Buddha, surprisingly, never thought of himself as a leader. Yeah, he is just like a teacher. This is his realization. Buddha doesn't have any sense of self anymore. He doesn't see himself as set apart from anyone else. There's nothing special about the Buddha in this way. This kind of, it has to do, I think, with the psychology of the Buddha. You don't see yourself as apart from everyone. You know that you have an insight, and so you teach, you are a teacher, but you don't really see yourself as having a special position. And of course, if the Buddha does not have a special position in terms of leadership, if the Buddha doesn't kind of tell everyone this is what you should do, yeah, in all kind of situations, if the Buddha says Sangha is the decision maker, not individuals, and this is how the Sangha, how the monastic community is supposed to work, it makes decisions together in unanimity. If the Buddha says that, of course, no one else has the right either to do that. So this is when he says this, yeah, let anyone who wants to, make this pronouncement. Obviously, he doesn't mean that in a kind of literal way, because no one really has the right to do this. And this kind of gives rise to how the monastic community works. And it's very fascinating the way the monastic community works, because the monastic community works on this idea of democracy. Yeah, it's not a democracy as we have it in the modern world, where you have the democracy of the majority, but it's an absolute democracy. Everyone has a voice. And if one person is against the decision, you can't do that. So it is democratic, it is decentralized. Every monastery is responsible for their own decisions and their own working things out on their own. And so that is kind of the structure that the Buddha passes on to posterity, to future generations. And this is, we see already here the kind of we see basically how this works. Yeah? I mean, obviously the Buddha has been laying down these regulations for a long time, but here it's like a summary of those regulations. No one is really in charge. And this is very important also for modern Buddhism. Yeah, if we want to live in the way that the Buddha laid down these things 2,500 years ago, then I think we should strive. I think it's our duty to strive to do things in a simpler kind of way. Yeah, the idea to have democratic decision-making, the idea to have decentralized structures within Buddhism, and these ideas is something we should gradually strive towards. Of course, the history of Buddhism is the history of the exact opposite. Yeah, it's the history of centralization, the history of kind of power into the hands of the few, and the history of kind of making hierarchies out of the Buddhism. And this is just seems to be human nature. We like to create hierarchies. We like to have people in charge. We like to have abbots, yeah, in the monastery, or abbesses in the monastery. So you have an abbess in your monastery? Yeah. You're by yourself. It kind of sort of becomes a bit different, doesn't it? Yeah. You always agree. Okay, that makes it kind of easy. Okay, that's very, very smart. Well, that's good to be by yourself. So in a sense, yeah, these are kind of very beautiful ideas from ancient Buddhism that no one really is in charge. And later on in this particular sutta, the Buddha says it is the Dhamma and the Vinaya that is your boss. Yeah, after I pass away, these are the things that kind of lead you on and decide what you should do. So we should really, these are the things that are the framework that we should use in any kind of decision making, or any kind of whatever it is within the Sangha or the lay community or whatever. So very interesting things. I'm not, yeah. Anyway, let's carry on. So the Buddha does not think that he should lead them. So and he says, I am now old, elderly, a senior. I'm advanced in years and have reached the final stage of life. I'm currently 80 years old. Just as a decrepit cart keeps going by relying on straps, in the same way, the realized one's body keeps going by relying on straps, or so you'd think. Sometimes the realized one, not focusing on any signs and with the cessations of certain feelings, enters and remains in the signless samadhi. Only then does the realized one's body become more comfortable. Yeah, so the same things that we saw before, but even maybe more powerfully stated, yeah, advanced in years. Body is like a cart that is falling apart, held together by straps, as it were. What does that mean? I guess it means that the Buddha always has to rely on all kinds of things to keep going. And that would mean, as we saw before, focusing on the life principle, etc. And if he doesn't do that, then it just really does fall apart. And only when he focuses on a deep state of samadhi, here the sightless samadhi, is he happy, is he free, is the body comfortable? Without those deep states of samadhi, the Buddha's body is basically uncomfortable. The cessation of certain feelings, obviously here referring to the feelings of the body, and he enters and remains in the signless samadhi, then is the Buddha's body comfortable. So the idea here, of course, is that when you attain a deep state of samadhi, and many of you will be aware of this already, as you go deeper into meditation, the body starts to fade away. The body starts to become, become irrelevant after a while. And after a while, that is why the pain of the body doesn't really bother you anymore. In fact, the pain of the body actually does become comfortable as you go deeper into samadhi. And it is kind of well known that if you go into a deep state of samadhi, you come out afterwards, no matter how long that samadhi lasted, you're always comfortable when you come out. The body always feels light, it feels delightful. It doesn't matter how many hours you've been sitting here. And that's kind of strange, right? If you try ordinarily to sit with the body for many hours, you feel all this pain. If you go into a deep state of samadhi, there is no pain. There is no problem. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The body feels really delightful. And again, it shows you the power of the mind over the body. It is the mind that really matters. And the body kind of falls into place if the mind is in the right way. So here, this is exemplified by the signless samadhi. The signless samadhi, animita ceto samadhi, is the Pali for this. And it doesn't really matter so much exactly what kind of samadhi it is. It could be the jhana states, it could be anything. I'm not sure exactly why the Buddha talks about the signless samadhi here. I don't really know why that is the case, but the main point is just that it is a deep state where the body fades away and the body kind of disappears into the background. That's really the main issue here. There's no more bodily feelings at this particular point. So that is the kind of the lead up to the things I really wanted to talk about. I never really even got to those things I really wanted to talk about, but it's also interesting. It's hard not to talk about these things because I think they all kind of point so much of the way towards what we're supposed to be doing. It gives kind of really balanced idea of what Buddhism is about, who the Buddha was, and all of these things. So I think all of these things are actually very significant for our practice. When we come back later on this afternoon, we're going to be carrying on with the sutta, and we're going to be talking about the idea of refuge and the idea about understanding how to take proper refuge in the Dhamma and in these teachings. That is what we're going to come back later on. And it is 9:59, so I'm going to stop there. So just wish you all well, have a nice meal, have a nice lunch, have a nice afternoon, keep on enjoying yourself, and then we'll see you back again at 6 o'clock this afternoon. And when we meditate, 2 o'clock, yes. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so that's it for now. So we'll see you again later on.